So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end. As per Shaul the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Hamashiyach laid waste for many centuries. As we read it in Shaul the prophet, it's always important reading the holy instructions and obviously understanding Hebrew, because the Hebrew language is the original language used by the divine. And because of translations of this particular sect of precise documents, we find then the importance of Hebrew in Galah or Revelation, because in Revelation we find sections related with the restoration of tabernacling and also the preparation of the nations for the time of the end. Now Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said in Daniel regarding then the time where his people would become random regarding this particular scripture in the 12th chapter of Daniel, as if the Shabbat or Shavat was placed aside for some time. This sometime was 1,000 years. So then, truly random speaking and scripture-wise speaking, there are lots of churches and congregations that they pick bits and pieces of New Testament, because a lot of people, they are only concerned with the New Testament, but they always make mention of the Old Testament when they are preparing their sermons. It's kind of interesting and ludicrous, if not very hypocritical, when churches, they are so concerned with only New Testament, and truly when they are preparing their testimonies and sermons, they always make mention of the Torah and the prophets and the writings. And it's amazing the fact they should only be concerned with the New Testament if they believe so much of it. Any records of the understanding of the New Testament is found then in the writings of Hebrew. Now, these writings of Hebrew does not mean the language of Hebrew. It's related only with the New Testament sect of writings known as Hebrew. Now, it's quite interesting, because people that only believe the New Testament, why then the writings of Hebrew, it states Hebrew? Isn't that mostly of the New Testament in the Greco language? Now, the hypocritical side of it is people go to these gathering establishments and they make such a bad report regarding the Old Testament and the law. And every time they go around and they are listening to sermons, 99% they find always making mention of the Old Testament. Now, if they were sure what they were doing, they shouldn't be concerned of quoting the Old Testament. They should only be concerned regarding the New Testament. So why then this point is very strong? Later on, I'm going to make a very important study of this section, because this nation was in fact found in the principles of the Hebrew text. And the reason why this nation then is being destroyed is because they have deviated from these manuscripts. Now, some people are not religious, some people are in the midst of it, some people are in the center, some people are neutral. But it's amazing that the first people that came to this country in the Mayflower, for instance, they came and they believed these holy scriptures. Now, when the nation became prosperous and rich, they ended up no longer studying these holy manuscripts. Now the situation is very dire. It's not easy. And they are wondering why then the economy is ruined. Why so many of our factories are gone. And in fact, came out very important news from the Briggs Post. It's very important and reliable British online newspaper regarding an American company. So Samsung company has purchased the American Harman International Industries for 8 times 12 digits. The largest overseas acquisition on record by a South Korean firm. Now, isn't that amazing? When I began to read the influence of the East and the establishment of Hamashiyach, the 23rd chapter, where Yehovah is restoring the principles that was obviously taught. And truly the American companies are being junked because they can no longer sustain themselves, because the market is so taken by the Chinese market, and rightly so, because for years they have worked very diligently. So this company has purchased another American company, and before the new presidency, then the largest acquisition of the South Korean country. Amazing. Now it shows Daniel the 11th chapter and the 21st verse, where then these particular systems spoken of by Daniel is severely weakened. There is. We are reading before our very eyes the reasons and understandings of these holy prophecies. And one of the reasons why Shaul, known as Paul, he talked regarding the prophecies. Now, people in these learning establishments, they truly are very ignorant regarding the manuscripts of the original Hebrews. They are very quick to put their personal situations in the midst of their own testimonies, and they mix the scripture, Greco, Roman, Hebrew, and they make their own point by mixing these things, and they make a huge show for themselves. Not every people is like this. Not every person is like this. But the great majority are. They want to make a name for themselves. And since this nation was founded in the principles of the Scripture, This nation was not founded on the principles of military, neither on trade. Primarily, this nation was founded by the principles of the Scripture. Before the military existed in this country, before the influence of trade, because mostly of the trade came from Great Britain, the Mayflower people, they came and they established their beliefs based from the Scripture. Now then, trade has done nicely for some time and people simply forgot. Now the country is in a big dire straits, or trying, walking backwards into the future. And they wonder why things, they don't work as they used to be. Because simply most of the people forgot the Holy Scripture. Now then, have this company from South Korea purchased another American company, and there are some reports then the America is obviously in its path of total ruin, and reluctantly it's kind of a hard of having so many bad news regarding the economy of this country. But Daniel already prophesied a long time ago. So, understandably, Shaul, he was talking of, at some point in the Scripture, but desired then, quote unquote, the gift of prophecy. Now, he's not talking about a person who has some special powers regarding prophecy. Now then, in 1 Corinthians 1:4, the first verse, then Shaul is giving a few understandings of these. And obviously people are very prideful. They don't want to admit that this country was founded in scripture principles. What they want is money, pleasure, manipulating lives of others, making dirty deals from behind. But then when you're making an evaluation regarding the holy instructions, we find then that this particular section of the known as New Testament, and truly the New Testament, per the instructions, they simply don't exist. Because the understanding of a New Testament is simply the spring feast that was completed. But then 1 Corinthians 1:4 gives us a few understandings of what Shaul said, and obviously the Hamashiyach ben Yosef was involved with it. Because the Hamashiyach ben Yosef explained these particular prophecies. Shaul is not talking of his own. Shaul had manuscripts. The other brothers before him had recorded. Though Shaul had a portion of a relationship with the brothers of the time, he was also reading manuscript from other people. So much so that he said, when you come, bring those parchments that were left in Troas. So there were parchments and Megillas that he was based himself upon them and He was reading from them. So Hamashiyach Shaul is not this great revealer of the New Testament of so many people are so involved with. In fact, his contribution for the New Testament is not as big as people are thinking. So then, chapter 1:4 states, then searching then the gifts. It's not truly gifts of the Spirit. You're talking about the functions of Yod He Vav He. Because there is no Yeshua besides Yod He Vav He, and his functions are related with a portion of this particular verse. And obviously speaking, that you may prophesy. Now that you may prophesy. The prophetic, he is explaining, is a period of time of the completion of the spring feast. That's the whole situation. People don't spend the time reading Hebrew. People don't spend the time studying. People don't spend the time reading the known as Old Testament. They don't understand the foundation of the apostles and prophets. And they expected to learn everything by osmosis. Then you put them up front, give your testimony, and then you'd be surprised at the number of people they are so lacking of understanding of these holy manuscripts. So reading from these, Hamashiyach Shaul then is talking of prophesying. For he that speaks in a tongue speaks not to men. Now we are not talking about tongues as people were thinking. This whole tongue situation came as a confusion of translation of the manuscript. There are no speaking in tongues. This blah blah blah, the people blah 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 blah. No. Shavuot was explained very precisely, and Hamashiyach Shimon explained what it was. Now people want everything in a spiritual understanding given, but some of these they have to have the basic spiritual knowledge. In these truly they have to study and being around those people who do understand these holy instructions. Now speaking in tongues, it's simply the relation of those people who were from various areas near Jerusalem during the time of the dispensation. They were talking in a Hebrew language because the prophecies related with what was going on was in Hebrew. So though these people had a relation with the Torah, the prophets, the writings, they were coming from other parts that were not from Jerusalem. And these people came to Jerusalem to observe the feast of Shavuot, 49 days, because 7 times 7. How they got 50 days? No idea. Pentecost is 50. The Hebrew text states 7 times 7. So then these people came from various areas outside of Jerusalem, and they came so they were observing the feast. And as the dispensation became evident amongst the people, they began to prophesy in Hebrew. Later on, the Greco-Roman made such a confusion out of it, and then speaking in tongues. Then they said, Shaliach Shaul or Paul spoke of spirit and speaking in tongues. What tongues? Shaliach Shaul said very precisely, if you are saying a word, make sure it is worthier than speaking only a few words that people can understand than speaking other babblings. So there are no speaking in tongues. People are simply crazy. Because sanity of talk is what then Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is explaining. You don't get drunk only with wine and whiskey and grog. When people are talking of tongues, they don't understand what they are saying, they are drunk. So then, when people are coming around, obviously they haven't understand the Hebrew language. That's what Shaliach Shaul said in Romans 12. Renew your mind, not only in the spiritual sense, but then learn Hebrew so then you understand the Scripture. Now people get defensive because they are ignorant. If you say that they are not ignorant, a person is lying. And then they get defensive. Sometimes people get hurt because they are simply mixed up with the facts and faith. And they are extremely condemning people. They themselves, they don't understand the Scripture, but they condemn those they are doing wrong. In their own kind of vocabulary, dictionary, think wrong is. Now there are very condemning people. They themselves, they speaking in a tongue that they themselves don't understand. They don't know what they are saying. Shaliach Shaul said not to do it. They are in a state of being drunk, and then they condemn those who then, in a physical sense, they drink, use drugs, and having unique relationships. And then they go to those establishments talking babbling, blah 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 blah. And they try to find a translator for it. Other than Hebrew, waste no time and try to find a translator. That's why so many people, they hate the church because of these very people. Holier than thou. Couple of words, holy scoundrels. So then, Shaliach Shaul, if you cannot say only a few words of sobriety, if people don't understand what you are saying, don't say it. But then when he was talking about the Spirit, and what else he's mentioning? He's talking about the prophecies that were prophesied many centuries earlier. These are the sections the Shaliach Shaul was talking of when he said, don't forget to bring those parchments left in Troas. A portion of these parchments were related with the prophecies, because he was talking about the completion of the spring feast. But he was dealing also with the Gentiles, not only with the people of Jerusalem. So then, for he that speaks in a tongue speaks not to men but to Elohim. Now comes the whole problem. If in their understanding of tongues, we are talking about what kind of function? Golah is some sort of a revelation. Now, interestingly, they have to use the generic name Elohim. Elohim means nothing. If a person is speaking on tongues, it's because of a revelation of sorts. What kind of a revelation? The very tone of the content speaks of prophecy. Prophecies reveal. Now, the only revealing portion of Yod He Vav He is Golah. So the only force behind is Yod He Vav He, Golah, in his prophecies prophesied long time ago. No, but people want to believe more than this. It's not believing more than this. People were scoundrelized in their thoughts. They don't understand the Spirit. Now they go around, gather around, and, trying to find some sort of answers where then there is no answer. They're simply crazy. For he that speaks in a tongue speaks not to man but to Elohim. Speaks in a tongue? What tongue? Hebrew. He's talking about Hebrew. He's not talking about blah, 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 and then trying to find a translator for babblings like this. But he that prophesies, he speaks for edification and encouragement and consolation. Edification. Simply understanding those parameters Yod He Vav He spoke of through his prophets. This truly is edification, because of the foundation of the apostles and prophets is the Torah. Edifying, edifice, building, encouragement. This is what Yod He Vav He understandably is showing as love. Encouragement of these holy instructions, encouraging one another to continue on with this faith. And consolation, speaking of the kingdom to come, government. He that speaks in a tongue edifies himself. Interesting, because he had previously said Elohim. So the scripture itself, the translation itself, contradicts what I was saying before. Speaks to Elohim, does not speak to man but to Elohim. Then later on, but edifies himself. It shows you the translation is not pertinent. But he that prophesies edifies, obviously, the whole group, because people came together to learn the prophecies of the Hebrew prophets. Now, he wishes that each person would speak in Hebrew. This is what he's saying, that everybody would speak with a tongue. In some translations, tongues. There are no tongues. He's talking about Hebrew. That's why he said renew your mind with what kind of a scripture? Hebrew scripture. The tongue then is Hebrew. But rather that you prophesied. And goes on and on and on. And then the prophecies that he speaks in a tongue, interprets. this whole thing was made it up. It's not consistent with any of it, other than Elohim. There should be Yod He Vav He Galah. Some of these bad translation, some of it is pure manipulation. Because even the translated manuscript contradicts itself. And the spirit of Yod He Vav He was not involved with it. Now when people gather around, then they condemn the Torah, they condemn the holy instructions, they condemn the Hebrew language. When we put them up front to give their testimonies, a disaster. And then when they hear, they get hurt and they get offended. Then they get defensive on top of it. Not only this, then they have a pride problem on top. So then, one of the reasons why Hamashiyach Shaul said what he said. Now, our nation was built upon these Holy Scripture. This nation without this Holy Scripture is done away with. That's why our nation is going down. Industry is nearly gone. Our factories are being purchased. Our government has no control over the finances anymore. They are not living within their means anymore. And people are in a very hard position because the liberties this country had a few decades ago, they don't want to have it anymore. Now, there is hope yet. If we learn Hebrew as Nazarenes, not as Jewish. Have it in mind, Jewish is only a tribe. We got 11 other tribes. So not every person wearing a kippah is from the tribe of Yehuda. You may find them from the tribe of Dan, from the tribe of Zebulun, from the tribe of Asher. But what truly then Hamashiyach Shaul is explaining, known as Paul? What Paul is explaining? What is this huge amount of translations and prophecies and Torah, and where do they come from? Are people conscientious that this country was founded upon these principles? You knock down the principles, the foundation of this country, and it destroys itself. Now people are throwing up their hands in the air and asking for help. And that's what Hamashiyach Shaul has said in 2 Corinthians 11:4. In other sections, you say, they have concocted for themselves teachers of their own makings, with itching ears, and always laughing at others and pointing fingers and being judgmental, and most of the time condemning the Torah, condemning his people, condemning these, condemning that, condemning the other. And there it is. Our government is ruined. What are the options? Print no more money. There is not enough taxes. The only thing that can help the people at the moment coming from the government is lowering the taxes, and that's exactly what the nation is having a shortage of. So then, translations. Before the might of trade, before the might of a military, there was the might of tenacity and discipline of those who came on the Mayflower, those people that came from Europe, came from sections of England. And these people had principles. And for a long time, these people were then respecting the Shabbat. So then, in the 28th verse of the chapter 1:4, and if there is none to interpret, let him that speaks in a tongue be silent. Therefore then Shaul is saying, my brothers, that even when you are gathering around, whoever of you has a psalm. Oh, interesting. Where does psalms come from? I thought it was some sort of a revelation. Let him speak, and whoever has a doctrine, a teaching. Interesting. And whoever has a revelation, Galah, interesting. And whoever has a tongue, that's not from the original manuscripts. But whosoever can explain these revelations in Hebrew. Let two of them speak, the most, maybe 4, 5. So when they are talking in Hebrew, let each of them, one by one, speaking orderly and explaining sections of the prophecy already spoken before. And if there is no person to interpret from Hebrew to any language, those people listening, then let them be silent, because they're not going to understand the prophecies. Next time we're going to evaluate more the situation regarding Hamashiyach Shaul, known as Paul, the importance of these holy manuscripts. And if we study the history of this country, you'll find those people in the Mayflower, for a long time they were maintaining the Shabbat. So they had knowledge of Hebrew. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.